Greetings friends, the video you're about to watch was filmed in real life in the wintertime or late spring I guess, and it was just an idea I had to go walk the road while it's raining to describe some of the road design and things that I did with the road, anything that I do different, and just a chance to talk about road design and performance in general. If you drive, maintain, or are planning on building an unpaved road in the country, I think it's well worth watching all the way through. There's a lot of good information in there. And even though it's a bit pedantic and unfocused and just off the cuff, I think it's useful or I wouldn't publish it. I was also going to add a lecture onto the end. After I did the rough editing, I took a bunch of notes, but that's not likely to happen anytime soon, so I thought I'd just publish this now. And if it ever does happen, I'll link that video at the end of this video. So I hope this is helpful for some of you, and that's it. Check it out. Right, yesterday I did a video, kind of impromptu, of dealing with some minor rain-related emergencies with water, flooding, and stuff like that. And I thought I would just do an informal video that provides an opportunity to walk my driveway and talk about road design, maintenance, all that stuff. Have the intention someday to do a video project that's like a whole series on this subject, but it's a big project to bite off and actually get finished, and this will be extremely useful. Anyone who's designing, redesigning, repairing, and maintaining, a gravel dirt road could potentially benefit from some of this information. Some of it will be pretty obvious, and other stuff is fairly progressive, new road building type ideas, but they're fairly well proven. So they're well proven on my driveway, which is I think it's over 10 years old now, or about 10 years old. So I've got to observe that whole time what has happened to it. We're gonna go take a look. So strap in for kind of a long rambling, let's go look at the road and talk about it in geeky detail. There's a culvert here at the end of this road. As you can see, it's all clogged up with sticks. That's because the chickens are basically like excavating machines. This is actually really deep and they just filled it up. You can see there's some water here. We're going to talk about where that water's coming from. And this first section of road here is outsloped entirely to the right. So that means that all the water that hits the surface of the road goes off and it just sheets off onto the ground and through the garden. It causes no problems whatsoever. So then you say, well, if that's true, then where's this water coming from? That water is coming from this hillside at various points and just kind of seeping through it. So this is one of the things you have to look at. If there's any possible way, and preferably through a few heavy rainstorms or a few bad winters, go and walk your road or proposed road and look at where the water is and where it comes from. Normally with an outsloped road, we hopefully be able to eliminate this ditch right here, but then all of that water, some of it coming in concentrated bits from certain places, would have to run across the road and it would probably cause damage. So really this ditch is only here to intercept water that's coming out of the hillside, but there's so little of it and there's nothing else going on here that's going to cause any serious problems. So this ditch has needed, zero maintenance through that whole time, and as you can see, it's a high volume ditch. So eventually I'll, come along and there's a few spots that could stand to be cleaned out. Right off, this points out the fact that you have to look at your topography and adapt the road to the situation. Building roads isn't this like cookie cutter, paint by numbers thing. You have a certain number of tools that you can use, and then you kind of mix and match those tools to adapt to each different environment and situation. See how the road is just sloped to the side and none of the water that hits the road actually runs into the ditch. I don't know what it looks like on video, but this in person looks much less steep than it actually is. It's actually a pretty steep little piece of road right here. And the steeper the ground is this way, like coming downhill, the stronger the outslope needs to be. So right here, it's a pretty strong slope going this way, but as the road flattens out this way, the less outslope you need. And there are actually numbers on that. If you look at the book that I recommended before, I'll put it on the screen. It has actual numbers. This is culvert number 2, and this is water coming off of the hillside up there. Now this didn't used to exist at all, and there's another one up here that used to take all the water that's in this now. But the previous owner actually kind of dug a trench across this meadow up here to bring this water because it was causing erosion over there. So then it just started causing erosion here, although it hasn't been too bad. This is a ferro cement thing here, and then it's backfilled with rocks and cement. So ferro cement is like, I can show you pictures of building this. I put in chicken wire and some rebar stakes and then plastered with cement plaster over the surface of it, and then ended up backfilling it too just to make it stronger. So this is super bomber. I totally screwed up this side though, and I should have gone kind of up over into here and a lot higher. I don't know what was going on there, so someday I have to fix this, but it's not that big of a deal. I'll just mortar and some rocks in there. But you know, this was kind of like eroding backward. See, that was like a stick blocking the culvert, but once I broke that out, it should kind of clean some of this stuff out now. And this culvert is self-cleaning because it goes down at a steep enough angle, right? You don't want your culverts to be flat. You want them to go down at an angle, and there's a certain angle at which they'll basically clean themselves out. Again, that information is available in that book. Okay, so here we have a ditch that has no water in it. So why do I have a ditch there? From this culvert to there is heavy, thick, slippery clay. And I had them crown this pretty high. It's settled in a lot. I like high crowned roads. Like the road builders always want to make it flatter because they think that's what people want. But start with a pretty high crown. And that way anything that hits the road is going to drain off quickly on having it cut down on both sides so water can drain out the sides. And any water that does get on goes all the way into the ditch and off right away. Big help. So we've ended up with a basically really stable section of road, partly also because there's a lot of rock in this section of road. We actually put in like double the rock, and it's big rock. It's quarry run rock, but it's like maybe 6 inches and down. So the reason there's a ditch here is because we wanted the whole road surface to drain really well, and for no water to collect under this road and then kind of just sit there or have to make it all the way across the road underneath and then drain out the steep side. That's why this is crowned, and also having it crowned gets the water off the road quicker. Whether that was absolutely necessary or not, I can't say, but I can say that it worked, and it worked very well. There's a little bit of instability. You can see there was some settling and stuff here, but very little. It's been fine, and again, this road is 10 years old. The other thing this provides is in case this culvert ever clogs up, then the overflow will go here into the next culvert in the next ditch instead of running up over the road and just washing the road out. And that probably won't happen, but sometimes it's good to have a little redundancy. So this ravine was getting worse and worse, and the owner wanted to divert some of the water. So some of the water that used to come down here is now coming down that other culvert. So everything right up here from this point going on for a while is shale. It's like a decayed shale. I'll show you what it looks like here. So here we have what's called an armored crossing, and that just means that the surface of the road is armored against erosion with some kind of paving. Normally it would just be a bunch of big rocks, but I had all this broken concrete, dished it out the way I wanted it, and I laid this stuff in. It took about a day and a half or something like that, and it's just absolutely bomb-proof now. I never have to worry about it. Sometimes considerably more water than this can be coming down here at times. It only flows once or twice a year usually, and sometimes some years it doesn't flow at all. And that's only in big rainstorms, so in the summer it's completely dry. Now this road shape right here, like from right here, it goes downhill this way, and then that way is downhill that way. So this is called a rolling dip. And the idea of a rolling dip is that it's a very long depression in the road. We could have made this just keep coming down and keep going down and down and down like a normal hill. But this way, this provides two things. In this case, it's an armored crossing already, so that's important. But also, if any water ever accumulates up the road and starts coming down, these intercept it. You can use this as a design feature to put in every once in a while, like every, so many yards or whatever. You don't want it to be arbitrary like that, but to get water off the road in case any water ever starts to run down the road. And this is like a redundant safety thing too. After you're gone and it's like decades and decades later, nobody's around maintaining the road and it starts to fail and water starts to come down the road in large quantities, then these will intercept it and take it off the road. But the idea is that they're long enough to drive through at a reasonable speed without having to, it's not a speed bump, it's like something that you can kind of like cruise through. Okay, again here, all outsloped, but this time we have no ditch. This soil base is like this, the soil itself would be loam, and then there's a lot of this rocky shale stuff in it. So really a lot of this road is cut from that shale, which is then filled off the side of the road, and a lot of the base, like up here close, is just that stuff. So it's really, really stable. We went ahead and put a thin skim of rock. Like here, this dark rock, this is where the big rock stops, like the 6-inch base. And then this stuff is like a mixture of dirt and small gravel from my neighbor's quarry. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. You just lay it on and roll it and it makes a perfect surface. So in this case, we really don't have it. We don't need the ditch here. One of the machine operators started to cut this ditch, and I had to run up and stop him and have him fill it back in. So yeah, it's great. There's no ditch to maintain. My road is wider. It's cheaper to build. If you look at this, you say, well, what if you slipped off this road? I mean, look right here. Look how sloped that is. You know, it could happen. There's only so many people driving this road. This will never, ever be muddy because the soil just isn't muddy soil. It's like rock and it's super stable. So that's not a problem. If it's snowy and someone had like 2-wheel drive and, you know, regular street tires or maybe bald tires, yeah, there's a possibility that someone could end up sliding off this. But, you know, if it were a public road, I would kind of think twice about it. And maybe that's kind of a tough decision to make. But up here, it wasn't hard to make that decision at all. But you do need to think about that when you're outsloping. Okay, like a dummy rule for building this kind of road is if you have forest on the uphill side, then you won't have water coming down across, you know, across the uphill side down onto your road. And if it's grassland, which absorbs water much more poorly, that you will. I knew from walking this road for I think 2 winters before I actually redesigned it and built it, I knew there was no water that came out of any of this hillside with this grassland. So that's the problem with applying dummy rules. If you have to design a road without knowing that, you know, I don't really know what to tell you to do. But there are several cases where that just did not turn out to be true building this road. Look at all that distance I just walked and there's no ditch and we're still going. So awesome. If you don't need a ditch, don't use it. Again, steep hillsides, outslope. I can't get worried about it. You know, we get snow like once or twice a year usually. It rarely sticks for very long. You know, it's just my driveway, that's it. We did put some bigger rock on this part of the road. I don't remember why. I think the soil just isn't quite as stable as it is down further that way. Here's a tree I just cut up yesterday. So right about here, it starts to make a transition from being outsloped to crowned here. Again, here's another culvert. I've collected a bunch of rock to build like a culvert mouth right here that's real stable, but never got around to it. At this point I may not, but at least I got this all armored right here where the water actually comes down so it doesn't start eating a gully back up that way, and that's been effective. I might take this rock and use it somewhere more interesting, like for a wall or something like that. Now on casual observation, it may look like this road is just flat, but it is crowned. Again, I tried to have him crown it pretty high. I had him crown it higher than I think he would have, but it sort of settles in. So from my personal experience, which is admittedly limited, if you're building a road and you have a machine operator you're working with, try to get him to do the crown sections of the road a little higher than he probably wants to, so that there's a real, when you look at it, there's a real obvious crown to it, because it does seem to settle in a bit. Now this ditch carries a lot of water because there's a lot of water coming off. Oh yeah, so why is this crowned? Same thing. Clay soil. So right there at that transition, the soil changes drastically, and all of this stuff going up there from that culvert up is again a heavy slippery clay, real bad. We put a generous amount of this large rock on it, did the inside ditch, and you can also see that there's, because the soil in here is generally clay, like the top soil is okay, but not very far down there's a big sheet of clay, so think of it that way. You get this where there's water just running out of the hillside. You see that right there? You get a lot of that in this, and that's where this water is really coming from. This was successful, so we have a crown that's going to drain the water off the road to both sides, and we have it cut pretty deep with a pretty deep ditch, so any water doesn't collect right under the road surface. It has a place to kind of go out the sides of the road and then out this ditch or just down the hill there. And some of these things, you know, they cost more to do when you do them in the first place. Like, we just designed this and we're like, we're going to do this right so we don't have to touch it again. And aside from a little bit of personal maintenance, a grader has never touched this. When I talked to the guy who built it, when would you expect this road to be worked on? And he's like, maybe in like 2 years we'll come back and, you know, do a little bit of work. Hasn't been back. So this is a wet spot where there's clay. This is just a big gooey batch of clay, and so, for some reason water kind of percolates up right here. Even though this deep ditch is right there and all that stuff, this happens once in a while. So I keep this cone here so people won't drive. You see where someone drove right there? And it just squished it down. If people drive through this all the time, it'll just turn into a big squishy mess that's full of water. The only way to fix that probably is to excavate like a pretty good sized hole and fill it with big rock, or even a drain, you know, that goes off down the hill or off that hill. Okay, so here we're crowned up to this culvert. Again, that's all clay going that way. And I know there's spots, I'm not sure where they are, along this hillside where a significant amount of water will come out, like a seasonal spring type of a situation. Okay, so here's another rolling dip. I had a really hard time working with the machine operator I worked with to get these right. Like, he just didn't really understand the concept, I think. And this one isn't perfect, but it does work. And if any water ever comes down this road, like a large quantity of water, which could happen because there are large quantities of water right up here, and also coming right out here, which we'll see in a second, this will intercept it, I think, and get it off the road. But this should be a little bit longer and a little bit deeper to be a more classic, probably more effective, probably more long-lasting rolling dip. You know, this is all forest, and you wouldn't know that a bunch of water would be coming down here. But because I got to observe the road in a couple of really wet winters, at least one really wet winter before I built it, I noticed that this turns into basically a little creek when it rains super hard. Like every maybe 2 or 3 years this happens. This ditch had to go in from here anyway, and I don't remember why I put the rest of this ditch in, but I think it's in case the culvert up here overflows. But as you can see, this road basically is outsloped all the way up to that curve, in which case it inslopes because that makes a better curve for driving, and the ditch is already there anyway. But as you can see, there's nothing in the ditch, and because there's not a lot of water, it doesn't clog or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of leaves and sticks in it, but the capacity of this ditch is absolutely enormous. If that water ever gets out of that culvert or out of that, you know, where it's supposed to go, it's going to come straight down this road, and it could cause a lot of damage, but in this case, you know, it's going to end up in the ditch. The ditch actually might have been there already too. That could be another possibility. I just don't remember. Okay, so you can see there's a large amount of water coming here. You know, in a really, really bad type of flood year, this could be multiplied many times. So let's say that this culvert clogged up completely and there's a ton of water coming down here and it overflows. It's going to go into that ditch and be safely carried off to the next culvert. So that's probably part of the reason this ditch is here as well. Up here there's a vernal pool. Let's go look at it. This looks like candy cap mushroom, and it looks like there's a couple of old ones and then some new ones coming up. No, they're all old. So these smell like maple syrup when they dry. I was hoping to find some of those today. So this is like a pond, but it's only full in the winter time. It's called the vernal pool. So this always fills up and it always overflows every year. It's just going to be more or less in different years. Now this section of road used to be a huge problem. Somewhere between right there and right here, I think, there was a big sloppy clay mushy area, and we excavated like a small swimming pool sized hole. We put a drain in, corrugated drain, so just like a 4-inch plastic drain with holes in it, and then we filled it with big rock, like 2 truckloads or something, 2 or 3 truckloads of big rock, and it's absolutely solved the problem. And we knew that that was really the only solution. Like, we probably didn't need to go quite as big as we did. Again, we just wanted to fix it the first time, no matter what, and it worked. Now, because we fixed that, and because I knew there wasn't any water coming off the road in here, in spite of this being a spring area, those ferns are called woodwardia. They only grow where there's water all year long. So it doesn't have to be surface water, in most cases it's not, but there's really a lot of significant wet ground all year long. The horsetails I planted, the sedge I probably planted. This was actually completely wiped out with a bulldozer. The way that they did the road and the way they built it, he just came in and he graded all this off, and then we actually kind of filled part of it back in, and it was just a big dirt mess. And I planted all of those ferns. I transplanted them from other areas, and not only are they growing, but they're reproducing. There's little baby ferns all underneath there. I put the sedge grass in, I put some of the iris in, and because there was no water coming off this hillside and I had already observed that, I went ahead and outsloped this so we could eliminate this entire inside ditch. So we have no ditch all the way from that culvert, which is only to catch this water, and going up for a really long ways this way. Now as we walk up there, you'll see how much ditch that is, that whole distance. They actually cut a ditch originally. He convinced me to cut a ditch. I mean, it's hard to argue with these people. This guy's been building roads since he was a kid. You know, he's like a local guy from an old logging family. You don't want to feel like the crazy person that has some weird newfangled ideas, you know, which I think he did a little bit, but he's a really cool guy, and he also recognized the fact that these road building systems are coming into prominence. They're becoming legal requirements at times, and that's going to be more the case because they work, they make sense, and they work. And he was like, yeah, well, this is a good opportunity for me to learn that anyway. So he was a great guy to work with. Anyway, he talked me into putting a ditch here, because it's just what he does. It's just what he applies everywhere. And then we had a rainy weekend or something, and I had time to think about it. I'm like, no, forget it. Let's fill that back in. So when they came back out, we filled all this ditch back in all the way to that culvert. This is serpentine. It's usually a real heavy rock. That's what all this is. It's like straight run serpentine out of my neighbor's quarry. Now, we were lucky enough to get rock from our awesome neighbors. They're wonderful people, and they let us get rock out of their place. So we got rock cheap enough that we could afford to use a lot of it. You can see there's like a real slight leftover bit of this ditch right here, and there's a little bit of water running there, but not much. Most of the water that comes off this hillside like this, it just sheets across the road. Again, 10 years and it hasn't really caused any damage. It's usually not even this much here. Some of this might be because when we filled this ditch back in, we filled it with, a lot of it was filled with rock, and it probably acts as something like a French drain. But I think there's also maybe a very small amount of water coming out of this hillside. Many times, just been so glad that I eliminated this ditch and so much other ditch that I don't have to ever deal with or maintain. And again, it just makes my road wider. I turn around here frequently. This is also a turnaround or a pass for fire trucks, because every so many yards, the fire people want a double wide space so that if 2 fire trucks are coming or 2 cars or whatever during a fire, it's easy to pass and turn around and stuff like that. So for instance, if I wanted to make this like the right width and I had a ditch there, I'd lose 2 feet and I'd have to add another 2 feet over here or something like that. And again, you know, we have some water here that's coming probably out of that hillside, and yeah, there's quite a bit right there. It's still not a problem. It's still sheeting off the road and not creating any kind of issues, because in this case especially, we have enough rock. This is a culvert mouth that I built that actually goes really deep here so it can fill up with sediment. It still hasn't filled up, and when it does, I can shovel it out and I'll have another, you know, 8 or 10 years before it fills up. But as it is, there's still another 8 or 10 inches left. This has a ditch, which I'd prefer it didn't, but the way the road was already, it needed this ditch. I would have taken this section of road from this culvert and I would have recut it and outsloped the whole thing all the way up to the next section. But the owner at the time was kind of hard to deal with, and I just knew it was going to be a big battle if we wanted to change anything like that, and we just wanted to tread lightly on that whole relationship. We just didn't do it. Technically, like, there could have been a legal, let's go see if there's any mushrooms up here. There could have been like a legal avenue for us to just do that, because we have an easement here. So even though it's through someone else's property, if I want to come in here, I think it's within 30 feet of the road, and do any kind of clearing, any road improvements. If anything goes wrong with the road and I want to fix it, if the road becomes unpassable and I want to build like a section of road going around, you know, like a different spot, I should be able to do all that stuff. But you know, those things can turn into court battles and they cause discord amongst neighbors, and you have to weigh all that too and not just be a hard-ass bonehead about it, or you're just going to make everybody's life harder. No mushrooms up here. And the new people here are super cool. Like, I can totally work with them on anything. They're reasonable and nice. This is a walnut tree here, but it's actually the East Coast walnut. You know what, I'm going to trim that up because for one thing, this branch is going to be interfering with the road really soon. Get this trimmed up. Imagine what a saw log that's going to be someday. Maybe like 8 or 10 feet of perfectly straight trunk with no knots. I mean, I'm not going to be here to harvest it. It's not even on my property. It's what should be done. The rest of those are maple trees. They were just little tiny saplings when the road was built. Yeah, so the way road easements work is that, like, if I need to do any kind of work, like say this branch here, in a year it's going to be there, another year it's going to be here. It's almost in the way already. Like, I'm perfectly within my rights to trim that stuff back. If you have a jerk of a neighbor that's just going to complain about everything and just is totally unreasonable, they could still complain about it and cause you problems. But legally, that's how the easements basically work. And that should all be explicit in the agreement, like in the easement, that'll all be written. If anyone's buying a homestead or country property, get this book called, what's it called? It's by Les Scher. He goes over all that legal stuff. He's a lawyer, so it's a really great book. Essential reading if you're gonna buy a piece of property, read that book first. Keep it with you always until you buy your property and it's the done deal. So again, I would prefer that this was kind of all, you know, sloped outward.
3 feet. Okay, now. Oh yeah! Totally.
That thing was punky as hell. It just exploded.
Totally exploded. Yeah, to your point, Steve, that was an unpredictable.
Like, this was the first tree to die, and I remember trying to tell you guys, like, this is the reason
To take them
you can't
down.
leave those hanging, because imagine, like, see all these are dead already?
Yeah.
They could be on their way to being like that in 6 months.
Which is...
So then you start trying to drop them, like, if this is falling and it hits this on the way, it can actually fold in half and the top can come back. So again, I would prefer that this was kind of all, you know, sloped outward and didn't have a ditch. See, it's sloped in. It's not anything that's worth fixing. This is a pretty stable piece of road. Now I do see a bunch of water here and a lot of sediment, so let's figure out where that's coming from. I have a feeling it's due to the neighbors working on this area too, because I don't ever recall much water coming down here, but you can see there's actually like a lot of sediment. So it was a lot of water and some sediment. Oh yeah, so I totally remember this now. Okay, so in the video I just did, we worked on this ditch right here, and all that water comes from the ranch road, which runs up here along the top of this property toward the ridge. And so that's a problem because you can't just outslope this section of road to eliminate the ditch or anything. You need that ditch because it's catching this water that's coming off the ranch road. But I think this is the other place where there's water coming off the ranch road. As you can see, it's quite a bit. Now I remember designing around this, and this water basically went with that water across the road. But since they kind of screwed up this topography right here and added a bunch of gravel, part of the water is like sheeting off that way and going down. We should definitely eliminate that. So the solution to that is going to be to add some dirt and gravel right here to make kind of a hump or a berm that comes here, so none of this water can come off like that and then kind of sheet back in our direction. We don't want any of that water there. And as you can see, this is kind of screwing up their plans with their road here. The other option is to scoop this out more. Okay, so again here, I would have outsloped this. Again, dealing with the neighbor was an issue, and we have this water coming off the ranch road, which is an issue, and that's not going anywhere. Unless I do have an idea about what to do with that. So right there, there's like a waterway, the seasonal waterway, because in their yard, there's a spring. If I could take that water that comes off the ranch road and we can get it over there, that would be great, but we have to get it across this driveway and across their little driveway thing here. So that might be a little challenging, but that might be a project that's actually worth tackling someday. You know, just a little bit left here. Well, look at this. This is a problem here. Like, you can't put things in the ditch. I think 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years I've had to come in and clean this ditch out. You see how much stuff gets in it. And the other problem is we do get water off the ranch road when it overflows the culvert right there. As soon as this happens, I start to lose road surface. How often have you seen a road that's rutted, right? And there's water moving down the middle. Well, if you can ever keep that water from ever starting to run down the middle like this in the first place, you won't have a rutted road. Once it starts, it gets worse and worse. This is a crowned road, let's say. Water hits it, it runs, and it starts to go, and instead of going off the side, it hits that, and it starts collecting and collecting, and it starts running down. It makes a ravine. It's a tiny ravine. It's just a little tiny bit of erosion, but then the next year it's a little deeper, the next year it's a little deeper, and pretty soon everything that falls in the middle of the road for like, 5 feet wide runs into ravines and starts just compounding the problem. And in this case, this only happened because of the failure of this ditch and this kind of thing here. And this is just a situation where it has to be maintained. There's just no way around it because the trees are constantly dropping stuff into this ditch. But yeah, you can see it's all filling up. Need to get in here and do this for real. It's been probably 3 years since I did it. I actually rebuilt this and cut the crown off 1 year with a little tractor and handwork. Let's go look up here because this is the end of the road, so to speak. Again here, there should be water running over here. You either need to cut a bigger ditch, maintain it better, or get rid of the ditch completely, but we'd have to redo the whole road or bring in a bunch of fill to fill from right there over to the side about 6 or 8 inches up and make this all outsloped. But that could cause a problem too because sometimes the water comes off the ranch road here, and when it does, we wouldn't want that to run into their house. So if I can convince them to do a work day, we just get in here with hand tools and a goal of making a nice deep ditch right here and just do it. Right here, I had actually recommended to the road association that they outslope this corner right here, right up where it kind of changes slope, and redo this and outslope it this way. They called me one morning, they're like, weren't we going to outslope that? We're actually working on it right now, and it was too late because they were putting in a culvert. So they put in this culvert, but the problem with this culvert is it gets clogged up. Normally it wouldn't, it hardly catches any water. It should just be catching the water from that corner down here. But this ditch, as we saw the other day when I was cleaning it out, clogs up all the time, and then the water sheets across the road. You can see all where it came across right here. And then a bunch of water comes through here. Then the culvert clogs, goes right around that corner and down my driveway. Okay, let's go find a nice spot to sit down for a second and have a little talk. Found some orange chanterelles here. That one looks a little old, but it's probably still good. Same with this one. It's definitely a nice one. Yeah, that could be totally fine. It's hard to tell when they're waterlogged from the rain. Homestead Gourmet. Okay, let's kind of talk and go back over some of that and kind of create a little bit of a summary. Number one, you want to get water off of the road. You don't want water to sit on the road in puddles. You don't want it to run down the road. Wherever water accumulates in your road system, you don't want to accumulate too much water, because the more water you accumulate in a ditch as it goes down and down and further, the more damage it has the potential to do if it jumps the ditch. Sometimes it will do damage to the ditch, it just depends on the situation. But if it jumps the ditch and there's a really large quantity of water, it could mess your road up really bad. So getting water off the road in the first place, when water falls on the road, you want topography. You don't want, ruts or ditches where it collects in and runs down the road. It's a really common problem because of, two things: poor road design, poor road maintenance, and part of that maintenance is driving the road correctly, which we'll talk about in a minute, or effectively. Say, driving the road in a way that actually maintains the road. You can use your vehicle to maintain your road. So when the water hits the road, get it off. If you can get it off the road and have it sheet across the landscape instead of collecting in a ditch, reasonably, safely, do it. The thing you have to take into account when putting in ditches is what's the soil, so if you have a really, really heavy clay or something like that, you might want to make a crowned road so that the whole road surface, like the whole road bed is kind of raised above the landscape a little bit, because there's a ditch on this side and a hillside on that side, and so water won't sit in there right under the road. It'll kind of drain away and out the sides. That's the theory anyway, and it does work. So in that case, even though topography allows, you may still want to do that inside ditch, for instance. So there's numerous places I talked about that. If there's a lot of water coming off the side of the road, like on this section of road, as we saw, there's a bit of water coming out on the side of the road, but it's not enough that it's causing any damage really. And it's been there for 10 years like that, and it's just not a problem. But if there's a lot of water coming off, then you're probably going to need to put in a ditch and catch that, or you could put in a rolling dip, which is again just a long that gently goes down and then gently goes back up. So you can kind of cruise through it without really noticing it that much in terms of like it's slowing you down or causing any problems, but it's enough low that any water that comes down the road it'll catch. So you could do that and put in an armored crossing. Again, armored crossing is just where the bed of the road is just layered with some kind of rock or something, so it doesn't erode when a bunch of water moves across it. If you have a creek coming across, you can also do an armored crossing instead of a culvert. And it's actually better in a lot of ways because it spreads the water out, kind of slows it down, removes some of the energy, and it won't clog. So a culvert can clog, but an armored crossing probably isn't going to clog. So you're never going to have that problem. And you also have to pay for culverts. And while you have to pay for the rock or do some kind of thing where, you know, like I did with the concrete where I laid it in there, I didn't have to buy a culvert anyway, and they're not cheap. So really, when you can eliminate inside ditches reasonably that collect water and have to deliver it somewhere to a culvert, which then, you know, sometimes, usually to a culvert, which is another expense, again, do it. Get rid of those ditches if you don't need them. And there's a number of tools you can choose from. You have ditches, you have crowned roads, which should be crowned in the center, or they could be crowned off center. So let's say I have an inside ditch there, but I want to minimize the amount of water I put into it. I can make the road crowned just part way, like a third, like 2/3 this way and 1/3 that way, or something like that. You have outsloping, which you can use. Again, the outsloping changes depending on how steep the road is. So as you're going downhill like this, the further downhill you go, the more sloped the road has to be to dump that water off quicker, because it's trying to go down the road really fast, and if it's not sloped enough, it'll go further down the road and cause damage. So you want to make it more sloped, and those numbers are in the book. So for instance, when we did the road, while the guy was running the grader, my ex-wife Tamara and I would run out with like a string level and just check it. We'd say, you know, like 6 inches more on this side or something like that. It's like a quick way to do it, where he would just have to do maybe 1 or 2 extra passes, and then we got it the way we wanted it, and it seems to have performed really well. Culverts are an option. When you do an outsloped road or any kind of road where the water drains off the road surface, which should be every single road, don't leave a berm on the side of the road. You'll see people do that, like you know, equipment operators will grade a road and they'll leave like this little 6-inch berm of soil. You can't have that. You have to knock it off. At the very least, you need to go along with a shovel and cut little slots in it, so the water, when it hits it, it'll run down and then be relieved off of these things. So that's an option too. I've seen a road where the road was outsloped like this, but there was a tall berm on this side that would stop any cars from sliding off the road, but then every 10 feet or something they just cut a notch in the berm for the water to get out. Okay, I'm probably forgetting something important, but the other thing I really want to say that's super important is the way you drive your road has everything to do with how well it's maintained. Not only can you avoid damaging your road by driving well, but you can maintain the road. So think of your car embodies a lot of energy. It's really heavy, it's moving, and it kind of displaces gravel and dirt as it goes along. And eventually, if you just say drive the same in and out, the same right down the middle of the road every day, eventually you're going to wear ruts and it's going to spit the gravel away very slowly, like a few little pieces at a time. And then eventually, instead of running off the road, the water's going to go and it's going to find that low spot, and then it's going to start moving down. And as soon as the water starts moving down the road, it carries sediment, and the groove gets deeper and it gets deeper every single year, and you keep driving over it, and it just gets worse and worse. If you can afford to, I would recommend making your road wide enough that you can drive one tire in the center of the road, all the way to the center of the road. The only places on this road where there's any kind of real serious crown forming in the middle with 2 low spots is places where the road isn't wide enough to do that. Because otherwise, whenever I drive in and out, I'm like traversing the road or driving on one side while I go out and the other side when I'm coming in. That has kept the road flat, because I'm literally maintaining and like anytime I displace anything, I keep putting it back because I'm driving all over the road surface. Speed. is the other thing. If you drive your road fast, you're going to screw it up. Driveway like this, you know, definitely under 15 miles an hour, probably like 8 to 12 miles an hour, 8 to 10 would be better. The main ranch road, I try to stay under, well, I try to stay at 15, but sometimes I'll go up to 18. I mean, everybody gets in a hurry sometimes. You need to, like, you're late for an appointment or something like that. It also depends on what the condition of the road is. If it's super wet, like if it's snowy or super wet, it gets damaged much more easily. You should drive slower. If it's super dry in the summer and it's starting to get pulverized, like the road surface is becoming loose and pulverized and there's a lot of dust, you should drive it slower. When it's just damp and it's kind of settled in and the water's drained away, that's the time it's most durable. But in general, you know, be a grown-up. If you don't want to drive a crappy road, and if you don't want to spend money maintaining your road, drive it slow. And pay attention to how you drive it and try to drive down the high spots or prevent any from happening by traversing the road all the time. And if people did that and just got that mindset and got the habit, like what I do a lot of times is I'll drive out on this side and then I'll drive back in on this side, kind of the wrong side of the road here in the US, but like the right side of the road, the way people drive in England. That habit has served me really well because it's such a habit now that I don't have to think about doing it when I'm driving in and out. So if I'm spaced out or something, it just happens anyway. And that has made all the difference for a grader never having to touch this road at all. Since this road was built, I've had to repair just a couple of weird spots. Again, some spots that were damaged by water, by stuff that's hard for me to control, or I'm not maintaining the ditches well enough and it spills over, or places where the road is so narrow that I can't really traverse it very much and I start to get ruts. And as soon as those ruts form and water starts to move down them, you're screwed. Like your road's going to get worse and worse. At some point, it pays to stop and fix those as well. Since building this road, I spent a lot of time learning about it. It was hard to like deal with the machine operator and have the courage to tell them to do what I wanted them to do. Fortunately, I worked with someone that was really cool about that. Even though they definitely thought I was kind of weird. It paid off, it paid off. He has never been back here. I know he drove down here once and said it looked great, and between that and driving it well, I have absolutely no regrets. There's a few things I might have done different, but not very different. And again, the other reason for that is because I would come out in like heavy rainstorms for that first year or two before this road was built. Actually, the road was here, by the way, already, and I kind of redesigned it and recut it. It was like an old road, that old logging road. Yeah, because I went around and I looked at the soil, I looked at the water, where's the water coming out of the soil on the side of the road, and what are the problems that are currently existing and all that kind of stuff, and that really paid off. So if at all possible, do that. If you already own a road like this, like a country road, gravel road, consider walking it, like getting that book, studying up on these ideas, watching the next video series if I do that, but most of the information is here. You can glean it out of this. Consider just making a map of your road, go out with a long tape measure the whole thing, draw a rough sketch, and then redesign the road and say, like, if I were to design this road, what would I do? And that way, every time you have a machine out to fix your road, every time there's a big problem, you just say, well, I could use this as an opportunity, spend like an extra $1,000 or something like that and fix this section of road and like maybe solve a problem that you keep having that's been a recurring problem like that. And that's kind of what I would like to do with our main ranch road out here that's like the road association road, so that whenever major work needs to be done and some money gets spent, like we maybe think about spending that extra $500 or $1,000 to fix a section of road that's been a recurring problem. Okay, that's it. I'm going to go home and cook up some of these tasty mushrooms and edit some videos. Talking about the deer getting on these maple trees and tearing them up with their antlers. That's what this is. This has probably happened not this last fall, but the fall before. It's recovering pretty well, but I should get out here with like a tree tube or something and cover that up, because this is a perfect spot for a maple tree. And when I did the road, that maple tree was about 4 inches in diameter, I think. The deer rubbed it super bad, almost killed it, and it completely recovered, and now it's an actual tree. We like to encourage the maples here because there's not like a ton of them here, and whenever there's good habitat like this right here, like to encourage them to grow in those spots.